Hello and welcome to Cryptid by State, Alaska. Well, it is the first Monday of the month, and you all know that means we are taking another road trip in our Cryptid by State series. Today we are visiting the state of Alaska, and we have quite a few unique cryptids to talk about. I am pleased to tell you that one of my longtime subscribers named James Kushtaka actually sent me an email which included a lot of detailed stories behind some of these creatures. In fact, he pled the case for the inclusion of a particular cryptid that I rarely include in the main list, and I agreed that you needed to know more about the full story. So a huge thank you goes out to you, and thank you for the immense amount of help. So grab your snacks for the road and buckle up as we travel from our previous location of Virginia and head northwest to Alaska. Alaska has a fairly short and straightforward history, since it was first settled by a group of indigenous people known as the ancient Barrenians. As the people dispersed into the area, separate tribes were developed, including the Tlingit, Haida, Aleut, Yupik, Alutiiq, Gwich'in, Athabaskan, and the Inupiat. It is thought that the Russian people began making trips to and placing settlements in Alaska in the 1600s, although some assume that the first time Russia came in contact with the area was on August 21st, 1732, when the St. Gabriel set out to survey the area with A.F. Shestovsky and Dmitry Pavletsky aboard. Spain did explore the area as well and set up towns such as Valdez and Cordova, but that wasn't until late 1700s. With this noted, Russia was considered the owner of the land, and on March 30th, 1867, U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward struck a deal to purchase the land for $7.2 million. This has been called Seward's Folly, but not long after, massive gold deposits were found in the Yukon, and much later, larger deposits of oil was found as well. Interestingly, Alaska's capital was originally the Russian-named town of Sitka, but was officially moved to Juneau in 1907. One other interesting thing to note is that this state actually has 20 different officially recognized languages. Alaska officially became part of the United States on January 2nd, 1959, making it the 49th to do so. Moving on to the part of this series I have come to find out that many of you enjoy, and that is the story behind the state's flag. The flag is fairly simple in design, but it has a pretty nice story behind it. As you can see, it has a blue background with the Big Dipper and the Northern Star on it. The blue is meant to represent the Alaskan sky and the color of the state's flower, the forget-me-not. The Big Dipper is also known as Ursa Major, and it represents the Great Bear as a symbol of strength. Finally, the North Star is claimed to have many meanings, but its first description says it represents the future of the state and that it is the most northern state. The flag was designed by a 13-year-old orphan boy from the city of Seward named John Benny Benson Jr. In 1927, the Alaskan Department of the American Legion had a contest where Alaskan children between the ages of 12 and 18 could submit their design for the state's new flag. Out of 700 entrants, Benny won this honor as well as $1,000. It was officially adopted on May 2nd of that same year, and it is interesting to note that before this change, Alaska had just utilized the U.S. flag. Benny later became a local hero, and you will find his name on monuments, airports, and highways in many locations in Alaska. With all that out of the way, let's start looking at the cryptids. Alaska has some weird and wonderful cryptids that are said to roam about its massive lands. However, the first one I would like to talk to you about is a fairly common one, if I can say that. It would be, of course, a Bigfoot. I know what you are probably saying. A Bigfoot story? Yes. Normally I reserve tales about them for my honorable mention section, but with a story this interesting, I felt it deserved to be on the main list. But not only that, but my subscriber that helped, James Kushtaka, pled the case for this to be on the list. This one is known as the Port Chatham monster, or locally as the Tinek, and is found on the Kenai Peninsula. Stories of this creature have been around since the very start of the port town, which was developed in 1900. At this time, a cannery was built, and then the town was constructed around it. Only 5 years later, Port Chatham, also known as Portlock, was abandoned due to everyone, including the Native Americans there, being afraid of something in the forest that was described as being tall, bipedal, hairy, and a mix between a man and a beast. People soon returned to the town and even established a post office in 1921. However, signs of the beast still being in the area were still evident, since people found many large trees torn out of the ground and placed upside down back into the holes. Then in 1931, a logger from the town named Andrew Camlock went into the forest but never returned. A search party was sent out, and they found Andrew's body lying on the ground with a massive wound on his head. It was assumed that a piece of heavy logging equipment was used by something to cause the damage. Not long after this, a gold prospector headed into the forest to do some mining, and he never returned, nor was his body found. Later, a man named Tom Larson was gathering wood for his fishing traps when he noticed a large, hairy man-like creature standing on the beach. Tom ran back to get his gun, and when he returned, he found the creature was still there. Mr. Larson claimed that the being just stood there, staring the man in the eyes, and Tom was too afraid to pull the trigger. This kind of activity kept up for quite some time, and in the 1940s, there were even more reports of people venturing into the forest to hunt sheep and bear, but were never seen again. Things took a turn for the worse when residents started to find the dismembered limbs of victims that had washed off the mountains and into the lagoon. Allegedly, these limbs showed signs of being torn apart, rather than how a bear would normally handle its victims. Finally, a group of hunters were out tracking a moose when they came across the prints of a creature with a human-looking foot, but the tracks were 18 inches long. The hunters continued to follow the moose tracks, but quickly realized that whatever was leaving the giant prints was apparently tracking the moose as well. Soon they came across an area where it was apparent that a struggle had taken place, and the moose tracks ended. However, the 18-inch long footprints continued up into the mountains. The hunters then decided it was probably best not to find out what left those tracks. Once again, the families in the town grew tired of being attacked by this creature and left the town and headed to the nearby Port Graham. Not all took this warning, since in 1968, a hunter was trying to hunt goats when he found himself in a life-and-death situation as a large, hairy man-like creature started to chase him through the forest. Then in 1973, 3 hunters took refuge from a storm near the town. They managed to return in one piece, but they claimed that every night they heard a large bipedal being walking outside their tents. To this day, Port Chatham remains abandoned, and most fear entering the area. We are going to take a short venture away from the land-dwelling cryptids and look at a few aquatic or semi-aquatic varieties. Starting off, we have Alaska's own Nessie, which is found in Iliamna Lake. This creature is often referred to as simply Illy, but according to the Native American tribes, it is known as Jik-ik-nak. This creature doesn't have that in-depth of a description, other than it has the skin color of dull aluminum, is between 10 to 30 feet long, its tail moves side to side, and its head is narrow with a blunt front. They have been described as looking like mini submarines. If you caught me using the word they, then you heard right, since there is more than one, and allegedly they hunt in packs. Many stories have emerged that fishermen claim these creatures intentionally rammed their boats, and in many cases they are even successful at sinking the craft. According to Native American lore, many of their warriors have fallen victim to these beasts, since they do have a taste for human flesh. Outside of legends, people have spotted this creature while flying over the lake. In 1942, Babe Allersworth and Bill Hammersley were flying over the lake and noticed an extremely large fish. As they flew down closer to the surface, they realized this creature wasn't alone, and there were quite a few of them that were over 10 feet long. They kept an eye on the fish for quite some time before it vanished from sight. Then in 1945, a U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey pilot named Larry Rost reported they saw a similar creature while flying over the lake, and it appeared to be 20 feet long. A really interesting sighting sort of blows the common theory of this being a sturgeon out of the water. In 1976, a man named Chuck Capuchis and his friend saw the creature as they flew over the lake in their float plane. Chuck landed on the water and his friend started baiting heavy tuna hooks with caribou meat, tied it with 5/16 inch stainless steel wire, and attached it to the float plane. He threw the line into the water and waited. Suddenly the plane jerked forward and the men were tossed from the craft. They both managed to swim ashore, but they were both shocked to see something pulling their plane across the lake. After a while all movement stopped and the men got up the nerve to retrieve the plane. Once on board they realized 3 of the cables were completely gone, and when they pulled the other lines, the hooks had been straightened out. Other reports of this creature appeared through the years, but I recently found one that actually occurred on August 6th of this year. A woman named Alexandra Salmon and her sister Christine Salmon Binghurst are both highly educated, with Alexandra having a degree in anthropology and Christine having a degree in journalism, along with being presidents of their tribe's council. The pair were on a tribal business when they noticed a strange grayish-colored creature shooting through the water like a submarine and creating a massive wake in the water. As they watched, it sped away very quickly toward New Wayland Village. The two jumped into a truck and started to chase down the being and were able to capture a video of what they saw. I am unable to find this clip, but it states that the creature had 3 distinct humps and you could see the black shape of its body under the water. The next semi-aquatic creature is simply known as the Alaskan giant polar bear. There really isn't much to go into with this being, since it is a polar bear that has hairy paws and is quite a bit larger than a normal polar bear. Many believe that it is actually a surviving member of the once thought extinct species known as Ursus maritimus tyrannus. While descriptions fairly follow suit, there have been a few oddities, such as people claiming that they saw it having 2 heads. Although, in that case, I would assume they saw 2 bears side by side. For years, legends have prevailed within the native tribes of these beasts roaming about, and if this picture is accurate, I'm not sure that I would want to come face to face with one of these bears. I wanted to talk about the Tizer Herrick, since it really seems like a fascinating story, but from what I could find, it seems to be more of a myth than an actual creature. It is said to live in the waters around Key Island, and it has a head that is 7 feet wide, a long serpentine body, and a large fin on the tail. According to legend, it lies in wait at the banks of the shore, and when a victim comes by, it lunges out and grabs a hold of them. Stories claim that this creature is to blame for people vanishing while staying on a pier. It is said it is best to avoid going near water where you see bodies both of animal and human floating by, since this creature is probably waiting for its next victim. Again, this feels more like lore, but who knows. One thing that Alaska does have when it comes to cryptids is a lot of wolf-based varieties. One of the most unique is the creature known as the acklet. Descriptions of this being vary from it being a cross between a wolf and an orca whale to the creature actually just being a shapeshifter, where on land it can look like a wolf with a dorsal fin, but then when it enters the water it transforms into an orca. Either way, these beings are frequently seen as a bad omen, and normally the only way to tell that they are around is by seeing large wolf prints going to and leaving the banks near water. You would be wise to avoid these creatures since they are known to be very vicious and won't shy away from eating a human. In fact, according to legend, they will literally eat anything that is near to them. Fishermen tell stories of these beings attacking them in their boats while in the water, and other stories claim they will even enter a village at night and take a few people while they sleep. Moving on to another wolf variant is the creature known as the Amarok. Again, this creature takes on more of a mythic property, but I could see a real-life version of this actually existing, albeit without the more fantastic qualities. This being is simply an extremely large wolf that is sometimes described as almost being a bear wolf. Not much is shared about this creature, but I have found legends that they apparently could take the soul of a person if threatened or angered. Then, either the person would simply die, or the body would carry on as a soulless, shambling corpse filled with murderous rage until it was killed by the tribe. With that fantastic characteristic aside, many are aware that a creature did exist known as a bear dog, which was called Amphicean. So, who knows, there may be a little nugget of truth in this fantastic legend. As usual, I couldn't include every cryptid found in Alaska, but, of course, I'm adding them here as an honorable mention. I did mention Bigfoot in this video, but outside of the Port Chatham monster, there are other sightings of similar creatures elsewhere, but maybe not so violent versions. I also have to mention the Kushtaka, which is frequently simply called the Otter Man. I normally would have included this in the main video, but I actually made a cryptid spotlight on the creature about a year ago. I will include a link to that in the video description. Along with this, Alaska as well as Canada is said to be home to a wolf-like bear creature known as the Waheela. Again, I made a cryptid spotlight about this as well. An interesting creature to note would be the Adlet, and it is basically the Alaskan version of a dogman. The only difference is that this type actually started as a dog, and after breeding with humans out of spite, it created a whole dogman race. Who knows, maybe that's where the dogmen we frequently see stories about come from. Finally, I am including thunderbird sightings here as well. There have been numerous reports of this bird through the years, including one fairly recently. In ending this video, I hope you enjoyed hearing all these stories and seeing that Alaska has some pretty unique cryptids. As always, I hope I did this state proud, and again I must thank James Kasusnik for helping me with finding some of the more locally known stories about certain cryptids. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you share my videos with someone you know who may be interested in this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.